Today's webinar is brought to you by the Rising Tide Mastermind. The Rising Tide Mastermind is made up of a group of individuals that get together regularly to help each other solve our issues, but mostly to help each other get further faster in all areas of life. Whether our group or another group is the right group for you, I think now more than ever, everybody needs a group of trusted advisors. The Rising Tide Mastermind is putting on this proactive webinar series so we can focus on the things we can do and not simply worry about the things that we cannot. Our presenter today is Dr. Janet Stout of Special Pathogens Laboratory. Janet's been a great friend of the podcast, Scaling Up H2O. She shared some great information with us numerous occasions on Legionella risk and awareness. Today, Janet's going to help us understand best practices when we start up water systems that have been dormant for an extended amount of time. Welcome, Janet.
Oh, thank you, Trace. And thank you for the opportunity to be with your Scale Up H2O Nation. It's a wonderful day. And it's actually a sunny day in Pittsburgh, so lots to celebrate today. So hello, everybody. It's nice to actually be on not just audio.
Not just audio, we've got some video today. We're stepping it up a little bit. So Janet, the question came up within the Rising Tide Mastermind. A lot of us are dealing with systems that have just been dormant for maybe well over a month. And people are thinking we've got to get back to work, we've got to get people in these buildings, and they're not thinking about all the things that have happened while the water has been stagnated. Of course, us water treaters, that's all we think about. So we appreciate your help today with helping us understand really what that issue entails and what are some best practices around that.
Well, it's going to be fun, actually.
It's always fun when you come to visit.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so I think what I'm really asking your listeners, viewers to do is kind of get in the shoes of the microbes in the water a little bit, and that'll make a little bit more sense as we kind of go through it. And so I'm talking to you today about the risk of Legionnaires disease in building water systems after this unprecedented shutdown. And as most of your viewer listeners know, I'm an infectious disease microbiologist, and I'm president of Special Pathogens Laboratory, where we're more than a lab. We help and support water treaters all over the United States and others dealing with Legionella and waterborne pathogens. But the other thing that really I'd like to share is the other hat that I wear, which is as a researcher with my affiliation at the University of Pittsburgh with civil environmental engineering. So that's the perspective that I bring to the problem that your viewers and listeners are challenged with. And, sort of speaking of challenges, like a huge speed bump for all of our businesses and the businesses of our clients that really kind of slow us down in managing this situation. But, we really have to keep going, right? Even with the restrictions, and, here I am with my mask on, which I encourage everyone, although we are not wearing masks now because we are alone in our conference rooms, please practice all that safe distancing, and please wear the mask. And so I'm here today to really talk to you about some of the issues that make it safe or unsafe with regard to reopening. And this is really affecting pretty much any kind of building that you can think of: commercial office buildings, certainly hospitals, long-term care, senior retirement communities, hotels, even casinos. When you start sort of ticking through the types of buildings, you just go, yes, 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 yes. I'm going to touch upon these four sort of conceptual steps when it comes to reopening safely. And, most of you are all familiar with water management plans, but sometimes this piece of the water management gets missed, so we want to talk about including these low flow conditions and changes in occupancy in your water management plans. And what is the role of testing for Legionella in, before you open, after you open, and regarding, kind of your ongoing maintenance. You want to be prepared. And I love that at the beginning you talked about being proactive, and that's been part of my vocabulary for many, many decades. You want to be proactive and respond to the challenge. You don't want to be reactive and have to react under pressure. And having a plan for disinfection is all part of that. And then I always want to emphasize, doesn't matter what the situation is, document, document, document. And the meaning of that is in part the little lawyer that always sits on my shoulder, but also when you have water management, that's a key part of what documentation is. So we're going to kind of get to, what does it mean to be in the shoes of a microbe? Why do microbes like a shutdown? And what have we learned that can be applied to this situation? So while us humans are experiencing scarcity, just go to the grocery store and try to find toilet paper or paper towels, right? The bacteria have everything they need in abundance in these building water systems that have been shut down. So what I say is there's a party in the pipes. These bacteria are loving it in there under these conditions. And so we've got the little bacteria in the pipe there and the party hats. And I want you to think a little bit about who's at the party, right? So this is a partial list of bacteria that are present and growing in abundance in those pipes and water systems that have been shut down. Some of these I love to say: Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Acinetobacter species, Burkholderia. My favorite, next to Legionella, of course, is Stenotrophomonas multifilia. I love to say Stenotrophomonas.
It's easy for you to say.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it rolls off the tongue of a microbiologist, I guess we could say. And then other organisms like non-tuberculous mycobacteria. But the big one is, of course, Legionella, and the one that, for the most part, causes the most concern in terms of human infection risk. Your folks that are treating things like hot tubs and whirlpool spas, really need to be worried about Pseudomonas as well, because that's the one that causes that folliculitis problem for them. So what happens to water quality during a shutdown? And so I want you to think of that Tina Turner song. What's flow got to do with it, got to do with it, right? Okay, so she said, what's love got to do with it? But that's really the issue.
I think the original
right?
lyrics was flow.
It, really?
I think it was. They made her change it because only the water community appreciated it.
So what's flow got to do with it? So this is logical, but many of your clients are not kind of putting two and two together. So when there's stagnant or standing water, whatever disinfectant amount was in there, and generally speaking, it's pretty low, whatever was there has decreased. And then with respect to the hot water side of a potable water distribution system, you may have still the hot water generation set at 130 or 140, but it's not recirculating. So in the distribution, the temperature drops because it's just sitting there. It's not recirculating anymore and no one's using it. Similarly, with cold water, the cold water is not flowing. So it's not going to be cold because the temperature of that cold water is going to whatever ambient temperature there is in those unoccupied floors and buildings and rooms. And most of your viewers know that the growth range for Legionella is fairly wide. Ideal temperature is near body temperature, of course. But the point here is that the temperature of both the hot water in a potable water system and the cold water gets into a growth range that many bacteria like and will grow in abundance, right? So that's what's happening in those water systems. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you like a visual depiction of this, because it's sort of a theoretical thing. And so what is that? So the stagnant water also increases the time or the water age. And so Legionella in this water likes to hang out with other bacteria, right? So that's called synergy. They sort of do better together as, compared to apart. So these rapidly growing bacteria help Legionella to grow. And so here's the example that I wanted to give you. So imagine this vase as the pipe, and imagine the flowers as the organic, material, sediment and dirt that's normally in pipe. Well, this example, I actually did this experiment. So the water was flowing into the vase and overflowing over a 3 to 4 day period. Well, if there's no water flowing, this is what that water looks like. And then we get a little closer and it really is looking pretty nasty. Now, you all have seen this, but you've never kind of connected it to that's what's going on inside the pipes and water systems of the building that just sit there. So this experiment shows you that bacteria, if they're given a nutrient source and stagnant ambient temperature water, what can happen under those conditions. And so it's pretty nasty. Now the connection here and that synergy with Legionella is what I want to show you next. So the experiment that we did, and this was back in my early days as a young microbiologist, is what we did was we put Legionella in the agar plate and we left out the essential ingredient for Legionella to grow in that buffered charcoal yeast extract agar, which is an amino acid cysteine. So it wouldn't grow on its own. But if we put on top of it this other bacteria, it secretes into the agar a nutrient that Legionella needs to grow. So you can see that only the Legionella colonies in that medium are only present very close to that other bacteria. So that's the concept, that these other bacteria growing in abundance are producing nutrients that help Legionella to grow as well. And Legionella certainly is growing there too. Well, there are other microbes, most of you are aware of this, in all of the water systems that we use, and that's a unicellular organism called amoeba. So in a no-flow or low-flow situation, you know, the amoeba is sort of grazing along, and then they go, oh, here's some bacteria, I'm going to eat them up. Well, that's what happens in a low-flow condition. It's more likely that those amoeba are going to come in contact with Legionella. And then when it does eat Legionella, it thinks it's just having another bacterial hamburger, so to speak, or meal, but Legionella grows inside instead of being destroyed. And that's depicted in this video from the Center of Biofilm Engineering, where Legionella, that spinning, you know, kind of activity inside there, that's the amoeba and Legionella inside. And at about 1 o'clock on the spinning, growing intracellular organisms of Legionella, at about 1 o'clock on this cell is where it bursts open, you see there, and all of the Legionella that had multiplied into the hundreds are now spewed out into the water distribution system. So that helps you understand just not only the relationship of Legionella with other bacteria that are growing abundantly in water, but also amoeba or protozoa that are in that water. So we want to talk also about other changes that occur in these stagnant water systems, and particularly when they are repressurized. So they've been laying there dormant, you know, whatever is going on with the scale and material that's inside the pipe, all of a sudden changes because of repressurization. So this is sort of one of the visual pictures I want you to have in mind. And then the other is this one where you see all the scale and material that's on the sides of the pipe. And then in a dormant situation, some of that comes off. And then when repressurization occurs, you get brown water events. And I just want to also tell you that it's not just when you see brown water, you know, that's sort of the most extreme situation. But even we know that even in a glass of water that looks clear, there's bacteria there as well. So this association with Legionella growth and spread and changes in water quality and delayed occupancy was first noted by an infectious disease physician named Leonard Mermel. And he's at Rhode Island Hospital, and he published this paper in 1995. And the water quality changes that he was reporting were associated with construction. And each time those water quality changes occurred, there were outbreaks of Legionnaires disease. So the analogy is we have an analogous situation here with these dormant, unopened water systems. And these were his recommendations in that 1995 paper. Culture the water system before, during, and after these shutdowns and repressurization of the water supply. Culture for Legionella should be carried out, especially if any of those areas are used by people that would be in high risk. So of the buildings that we noted before, every time I walk through a casino, it's like there's old people with oxygen and smoking, that's a high risk group. Senior retirement communities for sure. Also, hospitals, of course, have immunocompromised people. So we have lots of people that can be at risk of Legionella in these building water systems. And in terms of when to sample for Legionella in a situation where there's a shutdown, you want to sample 2 to 3 weeks prior to occupancy. And this actually is also true with construction. And that 2 to 3 week period of time allows the culture results to come back, discussion to be had with you and your client and perhaps even their water management team, and then an action to occur in response to those results. And so if they're negative, on you go, no problem. But if they're positive, then you have an opportunity to orchestrate a disinfection procedure if that's necessary. And then he also went on to say, certainly if there's any discolorization of the water, brown water events should be reported, obviously, to maintenance personnel. And you should be aware and let your clients know, what does that brown water mean? Because I don't think they would put 2 and 2 together that it means there's potential there for increased risk of Legionella. So, what we're really all about here is preventing Legionnaire's disease. And so know the risk when you see it, don't ignore it. So I think for your viewers, if you are building operators and managers, this webinar helps you understand where the risk is and what you need to be doing about that risk. And if you're the water treatment professional, then it behooves you to help educate your clients about those risks so that you can help them avoid those cases of Legionnaire's disease after reopening. So there's lots of resources for water management and guidance for shutdown and startup procedures, whether it's a potable water system, a cooling tower, ice machines, all of that is out there for you to access. And so lots and lots of material out there. The 2000 ASHRAE guideline, New York City and New York State have guidance for cooling towers and healthcare facilities. The ASHRAE Standard 188, certainly the AWT 2019 guidance document, the newly minted Cooling Technology Institute Guideline 159. If it's a healthcare facility, you want to make sure that your clients are aware that there's requirements for risk assessment and water management for healthcare facilities. And then just published this month, the ASHRAE guideline update, now called 2020. So all of these are available to you to help you with the details. And we are not together long enough to go through all of that today, but I will touch upon a couple of things in a couple of these documents. And certainly ASHRAE Standard 188 is really the industry standard in terms of water management, risk assessment, and water safety plans. But we really want to focus on risk mitigation and decontamination, which are touched upon in the ASHRAE standard. But you probably heard people talk about this standard. It tells you what to do. It's a pretty high level guidance document in terms of a standard, not necessarily what to do. And there's more information on the what and how in the ASHRAE guideline 2020. And so I said it was newly minted. May 1st, it became available for purchase. So you can go to the ASHRAE bookstore and buy Managing the Risk of Legionellosis Associated with Building Water Systems, and some good bedtime reading for you. And then also I'd say some very good bedtime reading is the Cooling Technology Institute Guideline 159. I sat on both of these committees. Legionellosis Guideline, Practices to Reduce the Risk of Legionellosis from Evaporative Heat Rejection Equipment. So the Guideline 159 gives a lot of detail and is very specific to cooling tower operation and maintenance. So lots of great information on startup and shutdown. of cooling towers in the CTI Guideline 159. Things I like about Guideline 159 is really performance-based approach, and it emphasizes microbial control as part of an effective water management program to control the risk for Legionnaires' disease. What about controlling? So you've gone through this process, you've cultured for Legionella, and maybe you find Legionella has had a party in your pipes. You know, what do? And typically it's shock disinfection. The one thing I want to tell people is they want to do flushing, and there's nothing wrong with flushing the outlets, meaning moving fresh water through the building at a periodic pace. But I want to say it's not disinfection. So it may increase overall water hygiene, but it doesn't disinfect or remove Legionella from the water distribution system. So you may temporarily reduce Legionella at that fixture, but Legionella is throughout the water distribution system. If it's there, it's within and throughout. So don't kid yourself that you've controlled Legionella risk by just flushing the water. So flushing alone does not eliminate that risk. So when do you consider disinfection? And what is the guidance there? And so in the Guideline 2020, there's two recommendations here about when to consider disinfection that I thought was apropos. So here's in section 5.3.2. Consider disinfection where facilities where hot and cold water temperatures that are recommended for Legionella control can't be maintained through the entire system. That applies to shutdown, doesn't it? And then facilities where there's not a consistent measurable disinfectant residual in all hot and cold water taps. Well, first of all, you're almost never going to have a residual of the disinfectant that comes into your building in your hot water because it dissipates with heat. But, you know, people think that if we've got a disinfectant residual at the cold water tap, we're good. And most of you know that the amount of chlorine or monochloramine that comes into the building is pretty low by the time it gets there. And there's, you know, not much of a requirement in terms of code or regulatory requirement for that residual to be very high. So the point I want to make by these two things that are in section 5.3.2 in the ASHRAE 2020 guideline is this describes a shutdown situation, you know, where there's low or no flow. So you want to consider disinfection. Now, I mentioned to you that we can't kind of go through all that we want to touch upon today in terms of specific guidance, but I didn't want to leave you lacking. And so what we've done here at Special Pathogens Laboratories, we've written a white paper, which we will deliver to you electronically, that talks about operation of potable water systems during this low occupancy or low flow situation, gives specific guidance about reopening the buildings after the shutdown. It also helps you to address specific things that need to be in the water safety and management program and plan to address the shutdown, when and where to test, because this is not routine circumstances by any stretch of the imagination. And with regard to sampling for Legionella, this is a special circumstance. So what you might be doing in terms of sampling for Legionella on a routine basis, whether it's a cooling tower or a potable water system, this is different. And so you need a special sampling plan specific for this circumstance. You know, some details in the white paper about disinfection as a corrective action, and that's the vernacular for water management safety plans. And then some highlights on documentation. You know, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you document thoroughly, not only for your protection, but also the protection of the building owner, you know, because part of this is really exercising due diligence. And early on in our talk here, I talked about the little lawyer on my shoulder, which is always there, kind of whispering in my ear for the benefit of our clients. You know, you may be called upon to produce some evidence of why you've done what you've done, how effective it is, and that you've done it properly. And what I also tell people is that these disinfection shock treatments, for example, with chlorine, are not simple exercises. They're extremely complicated, lots of documentation that's needed to document tag out of fixtures, of measured concentration of disinfectant at each fixture. So there's a lot to it. And I think it's important for your clients and for you to understand the complexity of that no simple task. So in terms of the road that we're on in preventing building-associated Legionnaire's disease, you know, this says, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? We have come a long way. And what I usually say is, you know, my experience over many, many decades now of preventing Legionnaire's disease in building water systems, I like to say, I'm not old, I'm experienced. And someday you'll get to that point, Trace, and you'll be able to use that phrase
I just
too.
had a birthday. I don't feel that I'm far from it.
Okay. No, you're only as old as you feel.
That's right. That's right.
So we'll be forever young. But you know, I have an optimistic, and most of you that know me know I'm a glass half full person. And there's lots to be hopeful about in terms of our ability to prevent Legionnaire's disease. And one of the things that gives me hope is that we're talking about it as we kind of come out of these building shutdowns. So that means to me that the risk of legionellosis associated with shutdown buildings and low occupancy is better understood today than ever before. We've got lots of outbreaks that have occurred after construction shutdowns that help us understand that this is a real risk. And then the other thing that gives me hope is this publication that just came out last month. And this is the ASSE Professional Qualifications Standard for Legionella Water Safety and Management Personnel. And you can buy this from ASSE now. And what it is it's really important to set a minimum standard for knowledge about Legionella for people that are doing Legionella water management services. And so this sets a minimum criteria for those folks and provides a certification. So what that means is you have the standard, ASSE and IAPMO will have a training and a test that you pass, and you will be certified as having that basic knowledge. So this will go a long way to providing that sort of baseline help in educating people about Legionella prevention. So I'm very, very excited about that. And of course, the key to prevention of Legionnaire's disease, as we say here at Special Pathogens Laboratory, is you must test to protect. There is no way to know about Legionella risk indirectly. You know, you can't use heterotrophic plate count, you can't use pH, you can't use chlorine levels or temperature unless you were running your system at 150 degrees, which none of them do. So you really have to test for Legionella. And I will end my period of slides here for you is that I'm just really excited to be working together to end Legionnaire's disease. And that's really the only way we can do it is together. So thank you so much. There I am wearing my mask normally when I'm around other people. And of course, stay safe. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Well, Janet, thank you so much for sharing that. I know we've helped a lot of people. You've given us a lot of great advice, but a couple of questions have popped up since you've been talking. And one is, in a perfect world, of course, we would test at least 2 weeks prior to a building opening up. We're all working with building owners and managers that have not been into their buildings for several weeks. The owners are now pushing the managers to get occupancy up and going. And they're thinking about things on how they're going to keep people out of their conference room or 2 people only in an elevator. And they're just not thinking about their water systems. What is your recommendation on how somebody like myself can get them to start thinking about that when they have so many other things on their plate that they think are more urgent?
So this is what I think about, and I talked about this in our last newsletter, is, you know, COVID is bad enough. You know, COVID affects countries. Legionella affects you, affects your staff, your employees, your clients that come into your building. And then if there's a Legionella problem, it will compound your economic recovery. And we, you know, it's incumbent upon us, and my mother used to say this, know your history, right? And history teaches us that if you ignore the risk of Legionella in an unoccupied space, you may pay a very, very big price. So you can share with them, you know, these outbreaks that have occurred out there, whether it's a shutdown of a cooling tower, it's a shutdown of a hotel or healthcare. We know what can happen. And the best way to prepare and to avoid bad outcomes is to do things proactively, as you said at the beginning, so that you know whether there's a problem. Nobody that runs a building doesn't want to know that there's a problem with their mechanicals. They don't want to start up a cooling, well, I hope not, but maybe you could tell me differently. But you know, you don't want to start up a cooling tower when the fan isn't working, or it's bent or broken. And, you know, so the analogy is the same. You don't want to start up a water system without really doing some due diligence in terms of maintenance and startup, and then check to make sure that what you've done is effective in mitigating the risk of Legionnaire's disease. So that's the reason that you want to do it, is you want to have peace of mind. You want to avoid what can be disastrous, and maybe talking about the costs of outbreaks. Even a single case, you know, the health department comes, shuts you down, you know, water restrictions, hyperchlorination events, the dollars escalate to hundreds of thousands of dollars in a few weeks. And so this is a movie that I've seen many, many times. And it's not like Guardians of the Galaxy, like I want to watch that over and over again. It's a movie I don't want to see over and over again. And so those are the things that you can communicate. And you might even think about, you know, some water treaters, you know, sort of provide a document to the people that says, you know, I've talked to you about Legionella testing and educated you about it, and then you sign, you've acknowledged that I've talked with you about it. Because it's two things: you're protecting yourselves and your clients, right? So, you know, if something bad happens, you know, you're going to get blamed and you're going to be dragged into court. And I know about that because I've helped many of the water treaters that get into that situation, not because they've done something wrong, but because everybody gets sued when there's a lawsuit. Now you have to defend yourself. So if you've got some documentation, you know, that proves that you've done some counseling about this risk and what your recommendations are, that will protect you. And it also makes that person take pause. They're like, oh, I'm responsible for this. And you're reminding me that I'm responsible for this. And now I feel a little uncomfortable saying no. And you're just doing it for their own good. And you can say that, you know, this is often an uncomfortable conversation, but my job is to look out for you. And this is what needs to happen in order for you to be safest and the people in your building to be safest.
Well, let's say we've done all that, or maybe they've started up the building before we've had a chance to talk to them. And now we've got a stagnated system that's gone back online. What do you advise we do with that?
Well, you still need to know whether the risk is there, right? So you can always take some corrective action. So now you're maybe saying, okay, in again, the vernacular of water safety and management, when there is a change, the plan tells you to talk about what that change means and what should we do to make sure that the system is safe. And part of that is obviously testing for Legionella. So okay, well, all right, we're up and going. Let's make sure the cooling tower, now that it's up and going and it's got its normal concentration of biocide, that Legionella is under control, check. Decorative water features, test them, check. And certainly your hot water distribution system, check. So this is part of good water management per ASHRAE 188 for general buildings, and then CMS and CDC for healthcare.
So when we're looking at testing a stagnated system, what are the best places to test since the water's not circulating?
Well, it's not that much different than what we would recommend for routine monitoring, with the exception that it's under these circumstances. So cooling towers, we always recommend every cell, if it's a multi-cell operation be tested, even though you might be only using one of the cells. You want to know, is the disinfectant being distributed to the other cells? Is there risk there? Because we've seen that movie before. And then in water distribution systems, you would pick representative locations, hot water, you're sampling the hot water, immediate draw, the ice machines and things like that that may have been offline and brought back online. You're usually checking those. And then, of course, water features, for example, if it's a casino, they have lots of those. You want to make sure that those are checked off as having been checked for Legionella.
Well, Janet, you've mentioned the little lawyer on your shoulder numerous times. I'm curious, does he or she have a name?
No. But I'd be happy to take suggestions.
There we go.
Yeah,
so send those directly to Janet.
I can tell you that they're very well dressed.
Of course. Of course. Janet, thank you so much for sharing this information. I know you're going to join the mastermind group in just a few days where they're going to ask their questions directly to you. You're doing so much to educate the community on Legionella and things that we can do so people don't have to suffer Legionnaires disease. So thanks for all of that. And thanks for everything that you do for us water treaters.
No, thank you. And it's just great to be with you. And thanks for the opportunity, Trace. And it's especially great to be with you because you make my day a sunny day just because you're.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.